Assalamualaikum, my name is Tisara and I will be presenting on the definition and the concept of the rule of law. The phrase rule of law comes from French phrase known as la principe de légalité, which means principle of legality. The phrase refers to an administration established on lawful standards rather than man, in contrast to the belief that rulers are exempt from law that apply to others. The word suggests that every citizen is dependent on the law. In a simple word, rule of law indicates that the law is sovereign and supreme over all individuals. No one is exempt from the law, regardless of their rank. The rule of law is based on three principles. The first one is no one should be punished unless they have broken a pre-established law or an existing law. He stated that if somebody is going to be punished in the reason for disobeying any regulation or law, it must be proven that the law itself being stated in the law of the land. The second principle of DIC is equality before the law, meaning that no matter who you are, a government official or a peasant, you will face the same punishment if you break the law. The third principle is emphasize the role of judiciary in enforcing individuals' right and freedom. Judiciary branch must be independent from the government hands. This principle acts as a safeguard protecting an individual from arbitrary of government action. So according to Dicey, without applying this principle, it might weaken the law itself. Weak rule of law in the government is when the law is disregarded or being ignored. If the administration does not have a remedial system to enforce the rule of law, it will most likely to be rot. According to the UNODC Executive Director, Mr. Fedotov stated that weak rule of law and the absence of good administration in the government represent a significant danger to social and economic development to the world over, and they have blocked the country advancement in achieving the Millennium Development Goals. So from this statement, it shows that how serious it can be to for the country when the law itself is weak. Hence, Mr. Fedotov do add in the statement that an effective or just system and institution are the best thing in building the society that facilitates growth and development.
Hi, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Muhammad Aklam bin Muhammad Rosli, and today I will talk about the case, the introduction of our topic, which is weak rule of law. For the first case is restoring the rule of law, judiciary conflict. Okay, this case is about one of the Court of Appeal judge, Dr. Hamid Sultan Abu Bakar, saying about someone or appointing about a senior judge that he called ARLC, becoming a tyrant, or in the Malay word, bermaharaja lela. The senior judge that being appointed as ARLC is controlling the judge's decision, what the judges need to write and what the judges need to read and judge someone. So this looks like it will compromise the judiciary system, where the judges need to be free and not having fear to make a decision, so that the decision can be a good decision, not a bad decision. So that is for the first case. And in our presentation, we will talk about first the definition of rule of law itself. And then we also will tell all of you about the cause of issue of this case. And next is the implication of this case. Moving forward to the second case, which is injustice. This is about injustice, and it's about the current issue, which is double standard issue on rule of laws. Okay, we can see that nowadays, or just before just when PKP or MCO, when COVID strike, we have a rule of quarantine. People who come back from overseas or people who come back from Sabah and Sarawak or other states need to be quarantined. All people, normal people, will be quarantined for at least 10 days to 14 days. But the rule and the law that suddenly said that ministers need only 3 days to quarantine after going back from an official visit to another country or whatsoever. So this shows that there are double standards which normal people, all the citizens need to comply with the 10 to 14 days quarantine, cannot go to work and cannot do anything, yet ministers and high standards people need only 3 days of quarantine. And again, in this week rule of law, in this case, we will talk about the definition of rule of law itself, and then we will say about the cause of issue of this case, and we will talk about implication of this case. That's all from me. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Shazanaria and I'm going to present about the causes to the weak rule of law. So the first causes is double standard. So double standard is one of the causes of weak rule of law. Double standard can be defined as an unfair treat from someone towards another person. So this happens when a decision maker has a direct personal interest in a decision that being made. So personal interest can be due to the relationship, finance, and position. So for instance, in this pandemic situation, it was reported that there are different standard operation procedure between normal citizens and the elites. So this in terms of quarantine period. So in the context of unfair quarantine period, government should give the same period of time regardless of place they're from, and most importantly their position or power. Double standards should not have in every decision made by the authority, as it only give frustration, rage, and an unethical move. So secondly, inefficient enforcement is one of the causes that lead to the weak of law. When it comes to enforcement, it usually linked to the integrity of the government bodies. Inefficient enforcement made by government can lead to the people losing confidence and respect in controlling a particular issue. For instance, in handling COVID-19, government keep on changing the SOP, no specific structure are being presented to the public. This leads to the inefficient in coping the issues. People are mad and unsatisfied. Suggested that to improve the efficiency to the eyes of society, especially in Malaysia, every government department should be stronger in dealing with issues in enforcement and other obstacles. Lastly, and most importantly, there are no formal mechanism to consolidate the rule of law. This factor is the main contribution to the weak rule of law, because without formal mechanism, a law cannot be enforced, and there is no one would want to obey to that particular law. It is always portraying an unclear legislation and inconsistent national laws. For example, Indonesia used to have an informal mechanism to consolidate laws, which leads them to a result of the archaeologos chronicle weak rule of law and untrustworthy judicial. Investors frequently avoid seeking legal remedy as a first response. Hence, weak rule of law can come in many different ways. It is the responsibility of the government to make it stronger so that the country can have an unbiased judicial and efficient enforcement and more formal mechanism which lead to the harmonious country and ethical citizen.
My name is Rosfarida Hanim Roslan, and I'll be presenting on the implications of the weak rule of law. First, it can cause public distrust on the government itself. It actually happens because the public has lost their trust toward the competency of the administration of the country. The judiciary itself did not uphold the principles of the rule of law itself. Just look at how the judiciary being compromised by someone In the 1988 judicial crisis, the one that led the dismissals of Tun Sadiq Abbas and the other two Supreme Court judges, when the public has lost their trust toward the judiciary, perhaps the worst case scenario will take place in our country. The public might take their own action rather than let it be handled by a proper authority. For example, major rallies or demonstrations and many more will take place as more people express their frustrations toward the authorities. Secondly, it can lead to normalizations of violating the laws itself among both government and its citizen. The worst problem is that the principles of the rule of law itself are not entirely upheld in Malaysia, especially by the ministers. Just look at the double standard SOP for the ministers' issues. Many of them violated the SOP casually and did not admit their mistakes. The public has been outraged and has expressed their dissatisfaction via social media platforms. They urge the government to punish those ministers in the same way as the general public has. But the government unfortunately did not take any actions. So actually SOP are being made for preventing the spread of COVID-19 in this country. So both ministers and public should be equally bound by all the SOPs. So if these issues are not being handled well by the government, perhaps the worst case scenario will come out, which can only bring more harm to our country. For example, people will no longer concern themselves with SOP and as the ministers did not follow them either. So if this continue, COVID-19 cases in Malaysia will definitely escalate and put our country at risk. Thirdly, it can hinder the development and economic growth of the country. One of the principles of the rule of law is the openness of the government. If there are no transparencies, misconduct inside of the government itself is likely to be occurs within its own organizations. Corruption cases, for example, is already common every day among the governments in our country. Bribes are taken from authorities at all levels of government. And according to World Justice Project, Malaysia ranked 95th among other 128 countries in the world for openness of the government for the year 2020. This actually shows how weak our government is in upholding the principles of the rule of law in our country. When there is no transparency, the likeliness of government to manipulate our country's resources is high. Cronyism, for example, is no longer shocking news in our country, where the government projects are typically given to their families or friends. Public funds are used to pay for projects that are generally offered at higher cost to their own cronies. All these unethical acts will just be a waste of taxpayer money rather than providing the rakyat with better services such as healthcare, public infrastructure, and many more.
As for conclusion, today we need the rule of law to punish the one who violate the rule of conduct that has been written in the law of the land. And surely no one is immune from being punished from breaking the law. Such a situation will surely lead to the collapse of criminal justice administration and resulting in chaos and anarchy. Therefore, every effort has to be made to eliminate or at the very least reduce political and other interference in the investigation of the offence. If we can't accomplish that, the rule of law will suffer a serious failure, and will be put under significant strain. That's all from us. Thank you.